We are ready to pop back and get back to it.
Yep. Yeah, the breakout rooms are closed, so everyone should be back in.
Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone, from the afternoon breakouts for the showcase. I was really pleased. I had a little bit more of a chance this afternoon to really pop in and out of several and saw some really good discussions, some great presentations going on. So thanks to everybody today who was presenting and sharing. We will send out a note afterwards. We had some requests if we could share copies of your presentations. So those of you who were presenting today and sharing things, if you can send those to Michelle Sandlin and me, we'll find a good place for them and we'll make sure they are available to everyone who attended the showcase today, as well as all the slides you're seeing here in our general session. So I want to get our next panel going here, and I'm going to call it two Jeffs and a Mark. Because I have some colleagues of mine here who are going to join us, and we're going to talk about a really important aspect of this as we start to dip our toes into the technology that underpins all of these records. And we're going to have a brief panel discussion here with these gentlemen. So I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to ask Jeff, and Mark to please go ahead and unmute. And we're going to go ahead and get this going here. So I'm going to just ask these gentlemen to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Jeff Borer. So Jeff, if you'd please tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to the work in standards.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Tom. It's great to be back participating in the showcase again this year. I've learned so much and really appreciate getting insights into your campus projects. I'm with IMS Global, and my role is the technical program manager for digital credentials, and that includes our work with badges and the comprehensive learner record, and to some extent competencies in the frameworks that they live in. I support a number of our members' efforts through our technical work groups, and I've been heavily involved with the support of the development of the CLR standard that we'll touch on in just a little bit. Have a background in higher ed academic technology, and so it's a pleasure connecting with those of you from campuses in events like this.
Thank you, Jeff B. I'm going to ask Jeff G if he'd unmute and introduce himself. Nice to see you, Jeff Gran.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you. My name's Jeff Gran. I have been working the last 3 years at a nonprofit called Credential Engine, and I serve as their credential solutions lead. I've been involved in data standards, schema development with that group. And then before this role at Credential Engine, used to volunteer my time with IMS Global and had co-chaired the Competency Academic Standards Exchange specification, and then also what used to be called the Extended Transcript, but is now the CLR. So glad to full circle that way.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Mark McConaughey, are you there?
Mark, I am. I hope you can see me.
Yes, I can.
I hope you don't mistake me for Brad Pitt. That it comes up often, and I know for those of you who know me that it wouldn't be right if I didn't say something about it. Anyway, I'm the Associate Vice Provost and Registrar at Indiana University. I really have a connection in 3 ways to this specific work. One is at my own institution, we have developed a prototype for a comprehensive learner record for the Hoosier experience, in which we've used basically our digital platform to express a credential that is not part of the transcript. So that was number one. Number two, I was with Tom in 2015 when the extended transcript initiative began at the AACRAO Tech Conference. I've maintained that kind of relationship to that work going on through my period on the board of AACRAO. And on the board of AACRAO, basically kept in touch and was somewhat part of my portfolio dealing with the technical aspects of the CLR. And then third, as part of the work I've done on the CLR at my own institution, we really started thinking about how data standards would work. And one of the things that we did at IU in our work to exchange information with our CLR fulfiller paradigm, what we did was use the IMS Global CLR Standard in order to exchange that information. I'm also now part of chairing the work group that is taking a look at the implementation guidelines for how to use the IMS CLR standard to do that kind of record exchange.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so now that everyone's gotten to know you a little bit better, I'm going to start with the first topic today. And I'm going to ask Jeff Borer to start on this one and then ask Jeff and Mark if they'd like to add to that. So let's just talk generally, very broadly, standards. Why are they important in records? And maybe why specifically might they be important for a CLR? Do you want to start that one off, please, Jeff Borer?
Sure. I'll even take it a step back, even one level of detail, and think about standards kind of in our everyday life. Whether we realize it or not, we actually are quite familiar with the benefits of standards and standardization and specifications, from the roads we drive on and the consistent road signs that we follow, to our use of tools like USB connectors and Bluetooth devices. All of those experiences are made much easier and safer and predictable through the underlying role that standards play in the product development. So these standards bring in this like level of quality, consistency, and an easy on-ramp for producers who create products for those of us to use. So in the world of software development, it's the same idea. Open standards are technical specifications that are developed collaboratively, that are available for free adoption and implementation, to be taken advantage of by the solution providers that work on top of the standards to provide useful tools. So for institutions, the use of standards is super important because it reduces dependencies on proprietary integrations. Many of you are in offices and worked on projects where changing integrations that have been customized over time is really complex endeavor, expensive. Anytime there's maintenance that needs to be done, it's a difficult endeavor. So the use of standards eases some of those challenges. For software developers, the use of standards provides the blueprint for structuring the data and exchanging the data and participating in this connected ecosystem, which CLRs is all about. It's all about the connections between learners and their institutions and employment opportunities. So as Amber kicked off right out of the gates this morning, she mentioned that CLRs enable portability, or the CLR principles are that of portability and student agency in the process. And so the use of the standards really enables portability and interoperability and student agency in the process.
Thanks, Jeff. Jeff or Mark, anything to add on that topic?
Sure. I'm always, when we talk about standards, one of my go-to phrases, actually, there's kind of two of them. One is, and Jeff kind of expressed this, standards shall set you free, right? If you really have a set of standards, all of a sudden a USB port can be used in any number of ways. The problem comes when you get something proprietary, right? And the thing about standards is you can have so many. And therein, I think, lies the rub. Going back, I'll kind of connect AACRAO to standards. AACRAO has been interested in standards basically over the course of the last century, the 20th century. Really, standards work not only in a digital domain, but they also work in a qualitative domain. So the whole idea of the Carnegie Credit Hour and be able to basically take courses from one institution to another and make sense of them are a set of standards, normative standards that we have to use in order to exchange and make sense of this information. Well, with the rise of computing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, doing this digitally became paramount. And even all the way back in 1988, Speedy came to be, the whole idea of exchanging information in using a digital standard that would enable a machine-to-machine kind of connection was already in place. Now, it turned out, though, that although this extremely successful, Speedy was extremely successful. However, it was successful in various subpopulations. What happened is in states that really had mandated this kind of electronic exchange, Speedy, this kind of transcript really, really worked. And in pairs, if there was a high volume of information to be shared, they worked that way. But it was a heavy lift. And many institutions basically chose, for whatever reason, not to go ahead and do that heavy lift. After that time, now I'm coming all the way to the CLR component. And not only do we have an academic record, but we have this wide breadth of records. So now not only do we need to exchange in a digital way all of the academics records, but now we want all these co-curricular and other aspects of the records too. And then third, there's this vision of a full digital ecosystem that enables students to have agency over their records and so forth. So we need standards to enable that kind of functionality on behalf of the student. And last but not least, and I'll give a plug to my buddy Darren at Western Governors. If ever there was a poster child for the use of standards, it's look at Western Governors and what they've done with the LER, which is basically push their records up to multiple fulfillers. And they've done this by imposing open standards on their data and being able to basically go to the National Student Clearinghouse or IBM or whoever the fulfiller might be in order to make that happen. So I'm also all the way back to standards shall set you free. Boom.
Great, thanks, Mark. Jeff, anything you wanted to add on that topic?
I think beyond, the only thing we haven't really explicitly said is maybe what Sarah had posted in the comment here around the impact for the student. I think, I used to work at an institution that focused on adult learners, and they're very demanding learners. They expect what they learn in the classroom to be relevant to what they're going to be doing on the job. And without the data standards that connect higher ed, post-secondary ed, and employers together around skills and competencies and records, it's very challenging to help establish and connect this ecosystem together. So I think there's a lot of benefits to standards in general.
And that's a great segue, Jeff. I don't know if you intended it or not, but you've been involved in the work of creating CDTL. And so would you talk a little bit about that and maybe the relationship of credential engine, records, right, credentials, all of this is a bigger ecosystem that's out there?
Sure. So Credential Engine is a nonprofit, and we got founded from a Lumina Foundation research grant to explore the possibility of having standards and common vocabulary in this space. And one part of that research was just documenting, well, when we say credentials, what are we talking about? How many are there? And so we've published every year now a report. We'll have another one coming out soon in February on how many credentials are being offered in America. And the number is overwhelming. It's approaching 1 million credentials. If you think about the size of that market, then it's really risky and hard for learners to make good choices about which of these credentials they should enroll in. It's hard for employers to differentiate these credentials, and they treat them all the same, which leads to credential inflation. And it's hard for institutions to make strategic decisions about standing up programs because the fear is they won't be able to differentiate their new credentials and the value of them based on the quality of those credentials in a market that's saturated with over 1 million credentials already. So we need to do better in being able to explicitly and fully describe the credentials that are being offered in the market. And that's been our mission, is around credential transparency. And the way we've been pursuing that is a couple different avenues, but one has been this CTDL. It's the Credential Transparency Description Language. It is a open schema for describing everything you'd ever want to know about a credential. Its cost, its requirement. What type of credential are we talking about? Is it a license? Is it a certificate, master's degree? There's a lot of different credentials being offered. And I don't know if, well, there's probably a lot I could say about CTDL, but the one thing is, because of its complexity, it's not quick and easy for folks to use themselves. So we built a registry, technical services that are free and open, so institutions can use that language and describe their credentials on the web. And when we talk about credentials here, I'll just put a caveat that we're talking about the credential that's being offered. We're not talking about the credential that's issued to a person. So it's not a registry of CLRs. It's not a registry of diplomas or the degrees that are granted to an individual person. It's a registry of the credentials being offered into the market. So like a bachelor's degree in business at the University of Minnesota would be one credential in our registry that could be described. And the one connection here with CLR, I'll just say, is that we do intend and have seen folks connecting their CLRs with the registry and CTDL, and have been collaborating with IMS Global on giving guidance on those practices. So those are the connection points.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. That's an important one, because when we think about the sub-atoms, right, of all this, there's a lot of language in here. And part of that is just describing competencies and learning outcomes in a way that makes sense for others who receive them, right? So this is, when we think about issuing a record, there's also somebody on the other end who's probably going to be receiving that record, and can they pick that up and make sense of it? In higher education, we've become so used to the transcript format over many, many, many decades of having a standard for that we just kind of know that. But now we've got to kind of go back and do some more work here to create some common ways of being able to understand all this information. I'm going to turn back and ask Jeff Borer a question about this. So not that long ago, IMS Global began work to develop a CLR standard. So I wanted to ask you to talk about that. What is it a little bit, and maybe just a little bit about, why did you feel you should develop one?
Right. Well, let's take a little history lesson, a tour, I suppose, but I may not be the best one to give that history lesson, but I know the origins of IMS's work to develop a CLR standard mirrors very closely with the work of the Lumina-funded AACRAO, NASPA, NILOA CLR initiative. Maybe it came shortly after the launch of that project, but clearly, as institutions were desiring to provide their students with a supplemental record to document the various achievements that we've talked about today, it became apparent that these records not only should be human readable to aid in human communication, but also to be machine readable, to be processed by computers and technology systems. So thus a common standard is sort of, the benefits are sort of self-evident that we could standardize the way that this information is structured. So at its heart, the Comprehensive Learner Record Standard through IMS is a set of instructions, technical instructions that talk about how to structure the data in accordance, in a standardized way. So the structure of the data, how to exchange that data between systems, how to verify that data, and how to secure access to that data. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to the kind of the homepage for the CLR standard. There's plenty of documentation there. The CLR standard has been publicly available for over a year, and it's been implemented by the first wave of early adopters. It's in what we call a candidate final status, but it's not going to stay in that stage for very long. In fact, just last week, the technical work group, after years working on this, the technical work group voted to move it out of the work group to the highest technical advisory board at IMS for final approval. So we're very excited to reach that milestone. Many of you on the call have had a role in that in some way over time. So thanks to those of you that have been involved with that. So within a matter of a few weeks, it will be released, we expect, as a final status, which is really the signal that it's extremely stable. But anyway, there have been a wave of early adopters over the last number of months implementing CLR 1.0, and 3 of them have gone so far as to get their platform tested and certified by IMS for support of the standard. And so hats off to APHIS, eLocker, and Smart Resume from Identify for their early leadership in adopting the standard and bringing that to the market. So all the information's on the page I just posted in the chat. Certainly you can reach out to me if you have further questions than what we can cover on this panel discussion.
Oh, Jeff, thanks. And history lesson. I just remember that when this work started, and one of the things that drove us to kind of get together and start talking about this was the buzz was going around the records community on e-transcript or digital transcripts or enhanced transcripts. These words are floating out here. And then people came to AACRAO because we have been doing this work of things like Speedy and that, and they said, so what's the standard for it? And I think a number of us were like, maybe we could see one first and take a look. It was so new and just really hadn't really fully formed that I think there was a lot of consideration. It wasn't time for a standard yet, right? Because there wasn't the kind of consensus around maybe what the record could be or should be with it. But that pretty quickly changed, and I think we've seen some really hearty adoption of people really being very interested in doing this work. I know that Mark and I have presented at AACRAO several times about this, and we've seen the crowds grow at meetings, people coming in to find out more about what this is and doing the work. And in my mind, that kind of triggered the bell of, gosh, we better think about standards, because 1,000 one-off versions of this would just be chaotic out there in the marketplace. So Mark McKine, to that end, can you talk a couple of things? We've done a little bit of work here through AACRAO on the CLR standard, and now we're in the midst of some continuing work on that. Would you talk about that just a little bit? You've been spearheading that work.
Yeah, and I would say, just picking up on, well, I actually wanted to say, you and I have been presenting and the crowds have been growing despite the fact that I'm on the venue. It's kind of amazing. And so it must mean that there is true interest in the overall output that we're discussing, not in who the stars of the panel are. So having said that, one of the things you said was, it was really early, and I think you like to talk about the fact that we really need to see what CLRs were going to be before we start to impose a standard on them. On the other hand, once we went through the initial round of 12 pilots and then this whole second round, all of a sudden there were enough institutions in the mix that all of a sudden what you didn't want to have is the creation of 2,000 standards that might be in play for the exchange of information. So as adoption and traction of the CLR began to take hold, it was time to take a look at what standard might enable the kind of peaceful coexistence between all these CLRs and enable the kind of exchange and understanding of what was received. So at that point, IMS, who had already been in the digital badging world, had already been in the LMS world, had also began to propose a CLR standard, and AACRAO put together a group to review it, to not only say, gee, is this a viable standard and might it meet the needs of the institutions that already have a CLR, but does it have the capability to be flexible enough to not only handle the CLR, but perhaps because we don't want to exclude it, the academic curricular record as well, because often the credentials include both of those things. So a group was formed, and in May of 2019, after a review of the standard, it was finally concluded that yes, the IMS Global CLR standard really can accomplish these things, and we really ought to put it forward so that we don't have a conglomerate of basically standards to choose from. In other words, that you can have so many. So with that, however, one of the features of the IMS Global CLR standard is that it is ultimately flexible. It really can handle many, many kinds of things. And with that, however, we began to understand that in order to use these effectively, knowing how to at least guide people with how to construct the bits of data and place them into the IMS global constructs would really pay dividends down the line as consumers of that information, so that they understood what they were receiving. So we could accomplish a couple of things by putting together a set of guidelines. One, how do we effectively use this? What concepts should we use in order to drive the data into the standard? And third, if you're trying to consume it, here's the kind of things you can expect. This is how we've used these concepts to basically replicate or render that data. So with that, we have a work group that's putting together a set of guidelines for how to implement the IMS global standard. And we hope to have that done by the approximate April of 21 timeframe.
Fingers crossed that we will be there for that one. And I think that like any good tool that's really flexible and can accommodate a huge number of different use cases, it also means that how you configure that tool, how you think about those fields, how we commonly use them, it's like a good data dictionary right on any campus that helps us from getting confused about what anything might mean. I think that really, I'll circle back kind of as we close this up and think about the way that I saw this in the beginning when we came into this. I really thought at some point we'll have a VHS Betamax kind of scenario with this, and one will win out and we'll have the dominant CLR with it. The more I got into it, the more I realized that's not going to happen. But what had to be standard was the data underneath these records, that the actual way it looks and what you put in it is so contextualized to the institutional mission, the way it educates students, its concept of learning. All of those things are very, very different from one to the next. But this data underneath it can be the thing that can join us together and can allow us to really exchange this information. So I just want to thank the panelists, Jeff Bohr from IMS Global, Jeff Gran from Credential Engine, who's been such a good partner in this work all along, Mark McConaughey from IU Bloomington, and also who's been such an important player with the AACRAO board and AACRAO with helping us keep this thing moving forward. Stay tuned for the implementation guide for this coming out later in 2021. All right, thank you, gentlemen. Now I'm going to bring back up my screen here, and we're going to move on to something. This is the last thing, if you will, today. This is the last gathering point for us today. It's a really important one. It's our solutions showcase. I think all of us in this work have realized that having a good technology partner in this is vital. Even the institutions that were so well resourced they could develop their own CLR digital secure documents often went with a partner because they realized that was a much needed way to be able to utilize this and share it with others, if nothing else. And for a lot of institutions without those resources, they really rely upon these partners to offer them something of a structure, of a process, of a way to utilize their learning data that can make it into a CLR. So we're going to do breakout rooms here. They're scheduled for 30 minutes, but I did want to tell you that they aren't going to necessarily close after just 30 minutes. If people are engaged in conversation, something like that, we'll leave them open a little bit longer today as needed to let you really engage with these folks. All these companies have been involved with the development of CLRs, and we hope that you'll visit at least one, if not more. Also, I will tell you, I worked with all these folks over the course of the project, got to know them. There isn't a kind of latching life insurance salesperson among them. So do feel free if you want to share your contact information and get more information from them afterwards, that these are pretty reputable and folks with a lot of integrity about serving the higher education community. And the same way you navigated the breakout rooms before is the way you'll navigate them here. Just move from one to the other. If you need help, come back to the main room and we will get you to the next one. Let me show you, we've got today 6 different choices for you: APHIS, eLocker, Paradigm, Parchment, Randa Solutions, and also Solid, which represents MilGears, and that's the military's version of the CLR. So if you're interested in seeing some information about that, you can stop in with them. So please do enjoy and get out there and talk with these folks, and thank all of these folks for being with us today. We really appreciate them offering to serve as a reference and resource for us in this work. Great. Thank you, and we will see you. I will not be back to talk with you again today, but we'll plan to see you again here tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you.